Hi, my name is Rachel Saunders. Welcome to this latest edition of the Lavender and Steel Hot Takes. I have got the great pleasure of having Freda Wallace back on the show. Today we are talking about the EHRC guidance, which is coming into effect the week of the 5th of August. And this is going to get spicy. When I say hot takes, I mean hot takes. Basically, my first impression of it last April 2025, when the UK Supreme Court passed down the Paul and the Scotland ruling, was basically this is an incoherent ruling. It is not internally consistent, and the vast majority of people who are going to be harmed by this are cisgender women because they're going to have their bodies policed within an inch of their lives. As a trans woman myself, things have to be made clear going into what we're speaking about today. The guidance is only aimed at businesses, organisations and service providers. It is not for anybody to implicitly comply with what the guidance is saying. It is for businesses, organisations and service providers to enforce that guidance, should they so wish, because the guidance itself is aimed around preventing legal claims against those businesses, service providers and organisations. So if you as a person are impacted by this guidance going forward, document everything. Do not admit that you're trans or cis or any other identity. Simply get it in writing from whichever business, service provider or organisation is saying you cannot use the facilities that you are using. And then if you believe you have a claim, go and speak to a solicitor. Because under English law, under Scottish law, you have the right to be able to go to court to protect yourself. And if you're feeling you're being harassed, demeaned or dehumanized by a business service provider organisation, you have the right to be prevented from having sex discrimination, direct or indirect, or gender reassignment discrimination, direct or indirect. This is the trap that is being set up by this guidance because it impacts everybody. And so things we need to discuss are fears within the trans community, because they're justified, and the fallout that's going to come from this. Over to you, Freda.
I've been researching this for quite some time. You know, my blog goes back to 2023. And what I noticed is sort of the sort of cohesion of people coming together. And one of my first posts was called J.K. Rowling's Bottomless Brunch. And I noticed that the meeting of those people, it was when they had that meeting at the River Cafe in London. And so everybody in that room that was photographed by the Daily Mail, they were doing that as a kind of statement to show that this is a movement. Now that movement becomes a gender critical movement. So we have to define what, because you'll hear in the press, you'll hear in the news gender critical, but what does that actually mean? And at its heart, what that means is trans exclusionary. There's no getting away from that. Now, they can claim we're feminists, we're doing this because we want to protect women. And obviously they could say men are the vast majority of the problem in society when it comes to sex crimes and potential sexual harassment, which is true. But if you go down that path of saying that this is how men are, it almost excuses the behavior of men by saying this is an innate behavior. This is a natural behavior of men. We don't educate them out of it. We teach boys this is normal. And I think that is the danger of the gender critical movement. Not that it just attacks trans people, which it obviously does, but it also enforces misogyny. Because at the heart of the movement is misogyny. And that's what you will notice. So for every gender critical argument, whether that's to do with sports, whether that's to do with prisons, whether that's to do with single sex spaces, there's this almost ignorance of risk assessment. Because there are people that have worked in these areas for many, many years, who've done the work, they've done the research, and when they do the risk assessment, they don't see trans people in that risk. And that's what we've got to look at. So when you say, you know, the EHRC to me is just a corrupt organisation now. It's been corrupted at the highest level. And
Yeah, I'd agree.
when the EHRC came into being, I think it was 2026 or 7, it was Trevor Phillips who was the first chair of that. Now look at what he's saying now. He is gender critical through and through. So I think these neoliberal, I mean, not to get too, I don't want to go down that road too much, but the whole idea of a Supreme Court, the whole idea of an EHRC to me is anathema to parliamentary democracy because it allows for corruption. And that is what we've seen since Brexit, since all these arguments about bodily autonomy that came out through COVID. We've seen our institutions being corrupted. And I think I think
this is an interesting point. I mean, as somebody who is a law scholar and who's got a law PhD, I don't particularly have so much a problem with the UK Supreme Court in principle, or even the AHRC in principle. What I think we've got a problem with, and it was demonstrated in For Women Scotland, is you have ideologically driven groups, such as For Women Scotland themselves, who are funded by money that's inscrutable, using the court system to enforce a particular belief system, such as in this case, gender critical beliefs, philosophical beliefs. And what you've ended up with is a court case that realistically should have been a piece of legislation. This should have been discussed by Parliament. Parliament should, in all good conscience, have tossed this over time and time again, and it should have been put for a first, second, and third reading in Parliament.
I was just going to add to that though, because I think the word Supreme Court gives it something. It's like that. Do you remember during the break? This is why I brought up Brexit. It's because the very people that support this Supreme Court ruling on gender were very much against the Supreme Court when it voted against Brexit. Do you remember that? So it's this idea that there is this extra parliament, not para-parliamentary organisation that could usurp, parliamentary democracy. It's because what I've noticed in discussions about the EHRC guidance is that the vast majority of female MPs cross-party. Okay, well, what is it about? What is this for? What's it? It's like they're all confused about it because it seems to have come from the lobbying side of politics rather than the parliamentary side of politics. And remember, the Supreme Court had a ruling on the meaning of milk. And it had this ruling on the meaning of milk because of the oat milk industry. And that is how the Supreme Court works. It's like, we will say on a molecular level, milk is this. It's not going to stop anybody calling anything white a milky milk. But it has this kind of ability to say, well, that's what milk is. Okay, fair enough. But that is not how social reality works.
Here's a question for listeners. How many UK Supreme Court cases can you name? And I bet you the vast majority of people listening to this show can only name one case, and that is For Women in Scotland. Now, this is the UK Supreme Court should work but through a mechanism of not being doing its work and not being seen to do its work. I think the court as a whole has a constitutional purpose, which is to adjudicate to the highest level, like the old House of Lords did before these Supreme Court came along. So essentially the UK Supreme Court as is the House of Lords, but delineated from the parliamentary structure. So I think it is a reasonable thing to have in a parliamentary democracy because it is separated out from party politics and the assumption that there's party politics in the background. However, and this is where For Women Scotland shows the deficiencies of the UK Supreme Court, is that trans people are now reliant on the European Court of Human Rights to set that ruling aside. And that the only way that a UK government is going to set it aside is if new primary legislation is brought in or existing legislation is changed to ameliorate the harms. The risk of that, of course, is that you end up with a populist government like Reform in the UK coming in, and Reform could equally do the same. We don't have safeguards in the UK.
But you do know one of the main aims of the Reform Party is not to get our acronyms mixed up, but the EHRC, they want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of the European Court of Human Rights. So this is where it gets confusing because we're talking about the EHRC and then there's the ECHR. So let's just make sure people understand what we mean there. So we've got the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, and I'm talking now about the European Court of Human Rights. Now, that is what Reform want to undermine. And I think they can do it, because if they say, oh, well, these trans people, they've destroyed all assemblage of, you know, what people can vote for, and they will blame us for that. They will say, oh, this was a trans problem. I think that is what they're going to say.
I think it's more insidious than that, because it's not just Reform that are now calling for changes to the Human Rights Act. You've got the Conservatives, you've got right-wing people who see human rights, and even the court itself, ever since the Human Rights Act was passed down, British courts do not like the Human Rights Act because they feel it impinges on British legal sovereignty. And yet, as the Equalities Act lays out, it's like without those protections, many British people, irrespective of your perspective on sex, would lose out on broader discriminations that the Equalities Act protects against. Your philosophical beliefs, your religious beliefs are protected. As much as I disagree with gender critical philosophical believers, and I really have issue with them, and I've gone to town on them in my blog and in various videos, your intrinsic right to hold a belief, whether you're a racist, an anti-Semite, or a gender critic, you can hold those beliefs, but the moment you manifest them, that's when you can be pulled up.
Well, wasn't that what Four-Star 2 is based on?
Yes.
So there was this thing called worthy of respect in a democratic society. And I didn't really understand that, because I thought, how is this worthy of respect? Because there's nothing in her because I read her blog and I've read what she was doing on social media. I said, that's not really worthy of respect. So you end up in a situation where, like, groups like the Free Speech Union will say, well, maybe people should be allowed to burn Qurans. And I think, well, you know what, on a certain level, I think, well, nobody should be imprisoned for something they do, or unless it's hurting somebody else, because that is, I suppose I'm a libertarian in that sense. But why are we celebrating these people? You know, why are we putting them on a pedestal?
My argument about Quran burning, and this goes more broadly to beliefs, and it cuts to the heart of the EHRC issues, is that in an abstract sense, you can burn any book you wish, but there's a context to it. Yes, and there is an argument to be made that burning a particular book, whether it be a Torah, a Bible, a Quran, or any other piece of literature, maybe the works of Shakespeare, you get the Magna Carta, the first edition of the Magna Carta, burn those pieces of paper, and they have intrinsic moral and ethical value to a certain group of people. And I think that where I differ from American free speech abolitionists, I don't believe free speech is completely free. There are always consequences to your speech. You do not exist in a moral vacuum of anybody else. You have, every time you speak, and I hold myself to the standard, every time we speak as people, we issue sound into the social environment. We're not doing it in an abstract sense.
Well, you're transmitting something, aren't you? So,
yeah. And so when you look at gender critics, the whole idea of gender criticism being done in a neutral environment, they're not neutral. As soon as you manifest gender critical beliefs, same as if you manifest racist beliefs or anti-Semitic beliefs, you cause intrinsic moral harm to any trans person within earshot or eyesight of that speech.
But sorry to interrupt there, but what critics might say, how do you quantify that harm? Because obviously some people could say I'm much more sensitive than others. That I consider myself pretty tough. You know, it takes a lot to offend me, but I know what is offensive regardless of that. And people sometimes believe it's this kind of like hurty feelings type thing, but it's not. There is something intrinsic about your motivation rather than what is said. It's about it's about what effect you want your transmission to have, and I think that's the difference.
Yeah, that's why I talk about moral injury. And this is why I'm very clear on it now. It's like as a legal philosopher, it's like you talk about moral harm. If you say that all trans women are just men, you're immediately dehumanizing all trans women because you're explicitly erasing their womanhood. Now, gender critic.
I've called this identicide. And I don't know if you agree with that term, but because I don't like it when people say genocide and use that word, because that to me has a very specific historic meaning. But identicide is the idea that by saying this group of people are not real, they're mentally ill, they don't have any social standing, that is or an erasure of identity. So would you agree with that? Or?
I would say identicide is part of genocide. So they are historically, genocide isn't just about the Shoah. It isn't just about one particular group of people being targeted. Part of the reason why you can argue that the Gazan genocide is happening is that the Israelis are doing identicide against the Gazans in Palestine. They're seeking to erase the Gazan identity out of Palestine. The same for the Armenian genocide, the same for the Cambodian genocide. Many genocides have identicide as part of their core practice. And so when we're looking at the EHRC guidance, one of the things that it upholds in that is the right of gender critics to say, well, I can have my beliefs. And it's like, well, okay, if your beliefs are morally acceptable, then why do you not wear a T-shirt going down the street that says trans women should have no place in British society? Because that is essentially what they're calling for. You look at the extremist language that Posey Parker has done, that Helen Joyce has done. Helen Joyce, don't forget, listeners, said that trans people are a problem in a sane world and need to be minimized. So she explicitly called for, to use Freda's term, identicide. And none of the major gender critics called her out on that behavior. Every single gender critic and every single person who backs up Helen Joyce, who explicitly is seen with Helen Joyce, backs up what Helen Joyce has been saying. And this is the moral problem we face.
I think when you see the BBC platforming somebody like Helen Joyce, and obviously it's very... the frustrating thing for me is like, because I've been writing, I'm sure this is the same for you as well, because you write about the same things, even in a different way. But it's like, are you not listening? Do you not know what this woman represents? Does it have to be put on a billboard in front of you? And yeah, maybe it does. Because if they're saying explicitly what they believe, which is what, I mean, let's not forget, Helen Joyce said, trans people are a problem to a sane world.
Yep.
And the problem I have with that statement, it's not that I'm a problem, it's this idea of a sane world. I mean, who is deciding what a sane world is? That it already eliminates half the population. So I mean, that obviously I'm being quite irreverent there, but the full force of what she's saying is that there are certain people she sees as less than her, and the people she sees as less than her is trans people. Now, I mean, you know, I did that debate in inverted commas with Helen Joyce, and she tried to say in that debate, I'm talking about men being... I said, sorry, Helen, but your book was called Trans. That was the title of your book, right? So why deny? Why wrap it in this kind of faux, you know, this idea of genuine concerns or feminism? I think they're way beyond that point now, but that's where it was sort of coming from, wasn't it? Especially with J.K. Rowling.
It's entrenchment of a position that they can't dig themselves out of. And it's funny because you read through J.K. Rowling, you read through Helen Joyce, you read through Kathleen Stock, and you read through even stuff by Emma Hilton. Now, I have got into this with Emma Hilton on social media. Like, you look through my ex posts on my profile, and you will see clearly.
Is Emma Hilton the biologist?
Yeah, oh yes. Yeah. Emma Hilton's also needs to be. No, she's not a biologist. She's a geneticist. So to be clear, she's also very senior, and I think she's still interim head of Sex Matters. Right. So her science cannot be delinked to her gender critical philosophical beliefs. And so when we're talking about the EHRC guidance, and anybody on the gender critical side, is they have this intrinsic moral universe they're trying to shape, where they're framing trans women and any woman who they perceive as not being woman enough as an intrinsic moral harm. It's this implicit and explicit statement that trans women are a threat to women's spaces because we're predators in waiting. And despite all of their rhetoric, there is literally no evidence backing that up. And now I can tell you this for certain, listeners, that I have gone through the data, and if you go onto my Medium, you will see this. I wrote a piece in June 2025 where J.K. Rowling asked me personally to go through the data and show them. And Freda's read it and other people have read it. There is no proof that a post-transition trans woman is any harm to women. And it is when you go through the data, and I dislike using data to prove this point, because we shouldn't be using data to prove this point. If you want to go down the route of using data, cisgender women are likely, I think it's about 2 orders of magnitude more likely than a post-transition trans woman to cause sexual violence towards women. Now, when you frame it like that, cisgender women will become the problem. We don't want to live in a society where every woman is afraid of everybody else.
Well, and yeah, it creates this kind of, I mean, the whole toilets argument creates this kind of paranoid, sexualized landscape that it basically comes down to pointing at strangers. You know, my first thought when I'm out in public, if I've ever been to a swimming pool, I just don't. I don't want to be aware of other people's bodies. I just want to do, well, if I'm with my friend, I'm just doing that. And I think this idea, you get this with Helen Staniland, absolutely obsessed with this idea that there are penises flying around everywhere. And it's like, that's not happening. Even when I presented as male, I didn't see penises in changing rooms. But you know why? Because I wasn't looking for them. You know what? If I saw one, I'd be like, well, hang on a minute. Move myself away from that. Because that is not, people don't behave like that in a rational, in a respectable, in a private space. And if you can't behave in public, perhaps you shouldn't be in public anyway.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I think this is the obsession of genitalia shows more about the moral rectitude, gender critics, than it does about trans bodies. Because the vast majority of people, including trans people, do not care about genitalia. There is, and I wrote a piece deconstructing Vera's place when Amnesty's piece blew up. And it was very telling that the moment you start deconstructing gender critical spaces is you realize that they're all built on fear and hate. And I will defend this argument, because if someone wants to come after me and say, well, you're defaming Vera's place, okay, I'll tell you, why is it that trans women and any woman perceived not to be woman enough are excluded from those spaces? They're based on fear that a trans woman somehow, who, bearing in mind, the only trans women who will be using these spaces are trans women who've gone through sexual abuse, rape, and other horrific crimes. They demand that trans women are somehow lesser for experiencing that trauma than any cisgender woman.
Do you know what the scariest thing about all that was in my research is they attacked Edinburgh Rape Crisis because there was a trans woman who was a lead in that service, Midrow, I forgot her surname. Yeah, that's right. And they were very, I mean, I wouldn't say J.K. Rowling was doing it, but if J.K. Rowling gives the go-ahead, all the little attack dogs step in. And this was, that Edinburgh Rape Crisis had to move from where it was because they were getting threats to their premises. And one of the people who was very vocal in that attack was called Nicola Murray. Yes. And it turned out that Nicola Murray was abusing children. Now, I'm not suggesting that any of them knew about what Nicola Murray was doing, but if you see somebody abusing people on social media, sharing sexualized images of people, which is what she was doing because she did it to me, and I reported her, and it's just this, it's kind of acceptable behavior to some of these gender critical and TERF women that they will abuse and make sexual comments to people on social media. So if there's no barrier, nobody's checking, nobody's looking at, hang on, do you think you should be doing that? It creates this kind of invisibility cloak around somebody like Nicola Murray to do what she was doing. And it was because of people like me reporting her that her fucking devices got looked at by the police.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is talking of devices being looked over the shoulders. Should we mention what Helen Joyce was getting up to on a train?
Oh my gosh!
Research. Now,
I just want to say about this, right? Because I did a blog about this, and when I was doing it, I thought, am I doing the right thing here? Because if Helen Joyce has a proclivity and she likes Harry Potter porn, fine. I'm not judging that. What I'm actually criticising is I'm criticising the hypocrisy, because she wasn't actually hurting anyone. But you imagine if you'd have done that, if I'd have been caught looking at what is essentially fan fiction porn featuring children on public transport.
It's paedophilic. It's paedophilic material.
I'm
sorry, there's no way of looking
just
at
be
that.
careful with that, because I would be careful saying that, because it is fan fiction, and it isn't.
Yeah,
correct.
Exactly.
And it was like she it was a bit like this, you know, the Streisand effect, because Sex Matters put out a statement saying that she'd been, yeah, that's like, fair enough, but you know, you still did it. You know, it doesn't make it any better.
Yeah. You don't do. I mean, as an academic, and I'll just give you guys who are listening a bit of background. In academia, if you want to review any sort of material, such as pornography or paedophilic material or even terrorist material, there are safe rooms on campus where you can do that research, and the police are notified that you're looking at that work to make sure you're not going to get arrested. So,
but she's not an academic. She's not an academic. Exactly. I think Helen Joyce's qualifications are in economics or something.
Yeah, she's in economics. She's got a PhD in economics. But the point is, with her research, is if she wanted to research Harry Potter / fiction, you do it in private. You don't do it on a public train. You certainly don't do it where you've got potentially children reading over your shoulder.
But imagine how I felt, because Helen Joyce has explicitly called me a porn-addicted fetishist. Yep. Now, I don't mind. I mean, I was involved in a fetish scene, and I was very open about it. Well, I was open about it because I don't have any shame about that. I don't feel I don't feel like wearing PVC is necessarily a bad thing, right? Because to me, it's an artistic expression as well as anything else. But you saw what they did to my pictures, and you saw how they feasted over them, and then claimed to be the moral arbiter. I'm like, get lost. They've seen more pictures of me than most people, because they enjoy it. They enjoy having that power over somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
don't get me ranting about that. No.
Oh, no. I'm happy to rant away, because it cuts back to what the EHRC guidance is about. It's like, if you are prepared to protect the moral rectitude of manifested gender critical beliefs, we have the right, as people who disagree with those beliefs, as we do with evangelical Christianity and other forms of religion, that we have the right and the moral responsibility to draw attention to those hypocrisies.
It's got that you know that sort of British Viz sense of humour, and I think they actually enjoy that, and I can see why they would enjoy that, but they can't see it in the other way. They can't see it when I do that. They think I'm deliberately being, you know, abusive or something, or being a pervert in a very real sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, they did it to me last year with some of the artistic nudes that I've had. Now, back in my 20s, I did a ton of stock photography, and as soon as I had my operation, it's like I was very comfortable having new photography taken of me. Now, these were all artistic. There were no sexual images. There are no sexual images of me online. I've been very, very careful not to post sexualized images of me. However, I am not ashamed of my body. And I have had new photography taken of me. I've had artistic photography taken of me. I'm very comfortable in my body. And someone last year scraped an image from a particular website. And then they had the audacity to blur out my nipples and my genitalia. And I'm like going, I posted those images for free to people to draw. You've had the audacity to go and try and shame me with them and block out various bits and pieces. I'm like going, I am not ashamed. If you posted that image without being blurred, I would have had no problem with it. But the fact being an absolute...
Well, I was always... I mean, when I stopped working with the ambulance service, I was like, right, I'm going to do what I want. So I made this music video. I made this music video called "Daddy Sucks Female Penis," and that I shared that quite often, and because to me that was just irreverent and funny. But obviously the video was quite X-rated, and it ended up being banned on Twitter. But anyway. But that's what they have of me, and I'm like, so whenever I did comment with that image, I'm like, well, the point of it was like, you don't have any power over me. I'm in the image. I own the image. It's my work. You don't share it because it doesn't matter. It's already out there. It doesn't matter how many times you share it. So I put it out there in the first place.
Exactly.
Like, let's face it, like a lot of trans women, a lot of trans people I know, because they didn't like their body for such a long time, and because they didn't like their body when they were younger, perhaps when they do, it is natural for them to want to take pictures of themselves and want to celebrate the body and get a fashion shoot or do that. And that's true of women as well. It's true of anybody, because you see these adverts all the time, you know, do you want to do a glamour model shoot? And it's like, oh yeah, and it's, I suppose it's a nice thing to do, you know, but when trans women do it, it's seen as, you know, you're over sexualizing sort of thing. And I can see like people have criticized me for that, and I can sometimes see that I do that because I am quite ADHD and I do have quite a high sex drive, and I do put myself out there, but I've never put anything out that I would consider offensive. Do you know what I mean? Or that was deliberately trying to hurt anyone.
My arguments in favour of sexual liberation when it comes to trans bodies is like going, if you are against trans women doing this, and you say that actually cisgender women should be allowed to do it, then you are a problem here, because cisgender women do exactly the same as transgender women.
It's more cisgender women. I mean, because like the whole glamour model industry, and I mean, it is misogynistic. Let's not get away from it. Pornography is an exploitation industry. You know, nobody's denying that. But I think there's a difference when you're doing it as an individual and you're actually choosing. You know, you're not being exploited because you own it. You know.
Yeah.
And I've seen people criticize drag queens in the same way. Like it's like, oh, it's all about. It's not about sex. It's beyond that. It's like, I mean, there are drag queens that are sexual. Let's not pretend otherwise. But most drag, to me, is about a sort of, you know, an exaggerated version of life. You know.
Yeah, exactly. I think my again, coming back to the EHRC guidance, the whole conversation around drag queens is an interesting one, because historically, I had an issue with drag just generally. I'm not a big fan of the art form. However, as with all things, it comes down to personal taste. Like, I've been around drag since 2000. I came out at university in 2000. I went to Blackpool. We're talking about flamingos. We're talking about pink hunters. We're talking about caustic, northern, brassy, bold drag queens who just basically,
It's interesting because the first time I saw a drag queen was when my dad used to take me to Benidorm, and there'd be like a northern comedian who'd be racist, and then you'd have a racist drag queen. It was like, to me, it was horrible. You know, that whole culture was a bit nasty. But I think with it, I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of different strains of drag, but it comes out of carnival cultures and Mardi Gras, and it's anything to do with being larger than life, and that's how you get. I mean, a lot of the first pride parades copied and got their inspiration from Mardi Gras and carnival cultures. So that's where you've got to go with that, because, you know, anybody that was, you know, we still get these people that hate the Notting Hill Carnival, don't we? And you'll just count how many stabbings there were and just you know, use that as the narrative. So it's like the same people that hate pride celebrations will always, you know, there's always these videos where somebody on the right will go to a pride event and find the most weirdest things, like doggy porn thing going on, and make that the central theme of everything.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, what's wrong with? I will defend drag queens because drag queens are an art form. But then going back to pride, it's like, what's wrong with puppy boys? I saw a video where someone was slagging off puppy boys. And I'm like going, these puppy boys are doing nothing wrong. It's like, this is not a fetish thing.
I think the fetish. See, the thing with fetish is, like, because, you know, I've looked at it from an art historical point of view. The word fetish comes from religious practices. It's about the sacred magic object. It's not. So what it is, it's about when something becomes imbued with some kind of animalistic power, totem, and that is the magic of that. And it's like, if you're seeing wrongdoing in it, it exists in your mind. If you look at somebody in a puppy mask and think that is wrong, that is dirty, that exists in your imagination already. It's like you projected. Now, obviously, like there's always been fetishistic gay subcultures and all that, and leather boys and all that. So, But then Freddie Mercury becomes the most famous leather boy of all time, you know.
Exactly. I mean, anybody, and I'm going to say this with caution, listeners, because actually it's one of my, I've got a copy of his book on my bookshelf. Tom of Finland's art is transformative. It's one of those books where you read it as a non-gay man and you just go, holy fuck, I understand where this whole culture comes from.
But
It's amazing.
We've entered this kind of ultra conservative period where anything that is, I think it's to do with it's to do with this idea that there are a lot of people on social media that are being shown things they probably wouldn't normally. Yeah. And I can see how it's incongruent. Like if you're just scrolling down, say if you're somebody that's just watched Gardener's World and you're scrolling your Twitter feed and suddenly you see Tom of Finland. You know what I mean? It's incongruent.
Yeah. I was actually in Waterstones when I found his book. They are actually selling the collected edition of Tom of Finland's books, and I was like, I was scrolling through the LGBT section in Birmingham Waterstones back in 2012 when I was working in Birmingham, and it was like illuminating in the best possible way. It was one of the most illuminating books I've ever read, and it's why I went out and got a copy of it, because it's like literally, for me, it's an art form. And this is where, when you're talking about fetishism and talking about freedom of speech and talking about the EHRC guidance, so drawing this back into what we were talking about at the very beginning, if you want to have a pluralistic society, you have to accept that there is a texture to that society. And just as we have to accept that gender critical beliefs are an accepted philosophical framing, that in an abstract sense, as a trans person, I disagree with them fundamentally, but it's not for me to go and deconstruct that person's beliefs. Gender critics, conversely, need to stop being puritanical, need to stop seeing trans women as an inherent threat to moral society, and need to stop treating society as their own personal playground.
Well, I come from a sort of punk metal fetish when I was younger. It was kind of, I didn't think of it as fetish necessarily. I just liked the look of it because it seemed rebellious, outsider. You know, it was like wearing a suit of armor in a way. You know, like when you put that leather jacket on, when you put them massive boots on, and you make your eyebrows like massive arches and do all. It is like war paint, and it is like you're projecting something into the world that is like, right, this is, you know, my armor. And it's like, well, obviously I've toned it down a bit since, but I think, well, everything has a root in rebellion, you know. And it's like there was this trans woman on YouTube slagging me off this week called Mary Chew, and she's just going, it's like she was just slagging me off for like what I wear, and like, you know, that debate I did with Helen Joy. And it's like, well, why are you joining in as a trans person? Why are you joining in that narrative about, you know, that ultra conservative thing? Because, you know, whatever I choose to wear, you might not like it, but at the end of the day, it's the freedom we have, you know. And it doesn't matter how respectable you think you are. For gender critical people, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, Caitlyn Jenner or Sarah McBride. It doesn't matter if you could be the most conservative looking, normal kind of trans woman, but they're still going to call you a pervert.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter what you wear.
What pisses me off about people who come at you for that shot is you were simply crossing your legs. You were not doing it as a provocative stance. Yeah. And it's not like you were deliberately doing a Glenn Close Sharon Stone. Yeah. And trying to attract people. It's like
the thing about that is they almost say that I went there wearing that deliberately to shock, and I didn't. I wore what I wore because that's what I would normally wear on a night out. And it did cross my mind to change my way I was dressed. I thought, no, because Dawn Neeson was on GB News wearing fishnets, and I thought, well, if she can get away with it, I can. I didn't expect the wardrobe malfunction, I will say that, but nobody told me. You know, nobody who sat there said, oh, excuse me, Freda. You know, if you were really concerned, you might say, Freda, you know, I don't know if you know, but your tights are ripped. Yeah, that's what I would have said if I'd seen somebody on a stage and just whisper in your ear and go, look, I'm not being funny, but just pull your skirt down a bit.
Exactly. And I think this is where when you compare the trans response to the EHRC guidance to the way gender critics continually hound trans people. We've both been on the receiving end of gender critical abuse. I mean, I've got a folder stored on my hard drive with 2,000 plus examples of gender critical abuse, AI generated content, people taking my pictures and circling. There's a picture of me with one of my former teams where I've got my arm around one of my teammates and they've made it out to look like I'm being abusive. And it's like, this is me in a full goalkeeping kit where you literally cannot see anything and I'm being made out to be a predator. And it's like,
well, do you know what else? When that debate where I was wearing the short dress, somebody zoomed in on my ear because I've got a bit of hair around my ear, and they were saying, "Oh, that's man hair," because they had a hairy ear, but they actually zoomed in to see it.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable. So it wouldn't have mattered what I'd worn, even if I'd turned up in a boiler suit. They would have found a bulge. They would have found she's got 5 o'clock shadow. Look, her hairline's receding. They would have found anything. So it's like it was quite good. It was probably a good idea of me to do what I did because it kind of gave them something to focus on.
Yeah, and I think this is when we're talking about the guidance. It's like this is what the new guidance is introducing. It's all about perception. It's not about biology. None of this is about biology. So for the trans people in the audience who are going, well, I'm not biological XYZ, it's like, it doesn't matter. And same with the cisgender people. You are not safe from this new guidance. This guidance is all about perception. And my key takeaway from this is the only way this is going to get set aside, the only way that it will go back to the UK Supreme Court is when cisgender people are on the receiving end of the abusive behaviour gender critics are going to throw at them. And my deepest fear is the moment that a cisgender person is faced with this, the carve-outs will simply be for cisgender people, and trans people will face increasing marginalization from this. And we've joked and we've laughed about this, and we're treating the gender critical side as a joke. And most of the time they are a bit of a joke. However, and I want to be clear with this because I appreciate that people's fears, especially over the next weeks and months, is going to become very profound, is that it's not a laughing matter. Trans people in the UK and globally are profoundly impacted by what's happening in the US and the UK. They are seeing the sort of legislation and the sort of court cases that trans people are facing. We've got no power. We've got no intrinsic ability to be able to raise 200, 300, 400,000 pounds. Now, for all of the good that Translucent are doing, and obviously I've had stuff on the show, and I've talked to Robin as well. Yeah. Both of them are very knowledgeable. They understand the politics of it, but they are not the vast majority of trans people. And I mean, I don't pretend to be either. You don't pretend to be either. The vast majority of trans people have got no political voice. They've got no platform. They've got no reach, and they're being left in the cold because there is nobody who's able to take up the baton and run with it because the media are not giving them that space.
I think that's why it's important.
The media are treating.
Yeah, sorry. I just say, but that's why important it's good you do these podcasts and stuff because you can become I mean, it's not that, the things we say, we do joke, and I think we do that because we have to. If you don't joke, you end up crying all the time. But I think anybody listening, if it's good that if you do pick up on anything we say and you do want to contribute, I think it's hard sometimes. You feel like you're on your own. You feel like, this is going on around you. It can make you feel incredibly stressed. I know that personally. It makes you react too irrationally. It makes you lash out on social media. And I think if I can give anybody any sort of advice, it's just like there is community, and it's just not obvious straight away. Because what I found, I've been researching it for a while, and the whole gender critical movement, but it just becomes so tiring to have to keep looking at it. And I ended up, like, just this weekend I've been watching She-Ra, the Masters of the Universe, just to get away from it all, So yeah, I just think it's great that you do podcasts and stuff, because people think, another podcast, but I've listened to a lot of people talking about this kind of thing, and there's a sort of missing human element to it sometimes.
Yeah. And I also think as well, and it's part of the reason why I've done Lavender and Steel as a conversational podcast rather than an interview process. And this is the second time you've been on, and the first time we talked about your experiences. Now we've got room to expand and actually really drill down into these issues and treat it both with the seriousness it deserves, but also the levity that I think it deserves.
When I first started podcasting, I was doing it with my friend Vicky, and that was the time when I did that debate with Helen Joyce, and I didn't feel really like people understood what I went through to do that. I just did, so I ended up reacting really badly to people because they just thought, oh, it's nothing, forget about it. But to me, it was a really big deal, you know. So like that's where I feel like I've come through that process.
Yeah, and I feel what's interesting. I wrote a piece today talking about being on Medium for 6 years, and you look back at my writing 6 years ago compared to where it is now, and I wouldn't say I was naive 6 years ago, but there wasn't this urgency to where we are now, and we are faced with this urgent need to build a grassroots trans movement and trans ally movement that is pluralistic in tone, that isn't just reliant on billionaire funding, that isn't reliant on the Heritage Foundation or the Alliance Defending Freedom, that what we're doing is building something much stronger, because trans pluralism was demonstrated in Trans Pride London last week, where we had 150,000 people coming out. Compare that to all the gender critical meetings, where you have gender critics maybe get 50, 100 people, if that.
I think that one of the differences is, though, it's hard, like being trans is not necessarily an organising principle for activism, because there's lots of trans people that disagree about other politics and stuff. So I always come at it from a point of view of misogyny. It is misogyny that we're tackling. It's racism and it's ableism. And that is because I try not to get bogged down in identity too much, because some people might hate my content and they're also trans, but they might like another trans person. So it's like, it's hard to have a cohesive movement based on being trans, because it's just something people are, you know. It's hard to quantify. I mean, this is just I don't know how you feel about that, but I find it hard to quantify that, and it's hard to say what is trans, what is that, because and I think that gender critical can prey on that, because there is we do doubt ourselves. It is normal to think, am I right? Am I right to feel the way I do? Am I right? And I think accepting that doubt is part of it, because it can make you aggressive in other ways. When you know, if somebody's challenging obviously when somebody's challenging your identity, that is a very abusive thing to do. But we also do that to ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is where, when you look at the EHRC guidance, a big conversation in the trans community over the last year, since the form has gotten passed down, has been tearing the trans community apart. And I had this, I've spoken to a lot of people about this. And there's this now dividing line between people who've medically transitioned, people who've had surgery like myself, people who've deliberately gone and tried to live a binary life, versus the vast majority of trans people who haven't either had the ability to do that or have no desire to be completely binary. And I think this is what the most divisive thing that gender critics have done, is exposed the biggest fault line in trans politics. It's always been there, always been there. Since the very start of medicalized trans bodies, there's been this fault line running through trans politics. Going back to the 1920s, you look at anything from the 1920s and you've got the same sort of political discourse going on. And now you've got people like myself who are going, if we want gold star trans membership, and I'm disgusted by that concept. So to be very, very clear, I'm disgusted by that concept. I could literally go and sign up to get a gender recognition certificate, and I could literally just be a gold star trans person, a gold star transsexual. But that disgusts me, because why should I be forced to throw other people under the bus just so I can keep my rights? And this is where the Arendtian idea of the right to have rights is so important, because the moment you start sloughing off people who are not acceptable is the moment you start undermining your own personal rights.
Yeah, I mean, add to that. I mean, I've met trans women that have never been political. They just blend. They sort of assimilate. They're so cis. I suppose you could call them cis-normative, heteronormative. They are never going to get challenged in a bathroom. They're never going to get challenged anywhere, because nobody knows they're trans, right? And I know trans women like that, and they don't have to be political. But if you're somebody like me that's like 6'2" and 4 foot wide with hands like spades, and you look like when you turn up at a bar, it's like the Titanic docking, and it's like, well, actually, yeah, I do take up a lot of space, but I'm aware of that, and I understand that some people might look at me and go, are you a man or a woman? And I've had to deal with that my whole life. Whereas some people who I suppose what they call passing privilege, I hate that phrase, but there are people that have never had to deal with that. And say if you transition when you're very young, and if you're if you like I say, just if you're very heteronormative, you're probably not as political on this issue as you're going to be if every time you walk down the street you can become a walking protest, whether you choose to be or not. Like when I know if I go for a walk to the shop now for a bottle of milk, there'll be some kids outside that shop who will say something like to me, and I'm just used to it. I shouldn't be used to it, but that is the mentality of gender critical. They have the mentality of teenage boys that have never been told not to point at strangers, or never been told, please don't say that because you're embarrassing the family. You know what I mean? That's the mentality they have.
Yeah, exactly. And I think drawing this all in, this is what the EHRC guidance is undergirding. It's not going to be the trans women who pass or are discreet or who just don't draw attention to themselves. It's going to be the trans people who are made to stand out, or who can't medicalize, or who don't want to abide by social conventions. It's like, why should trans people conform to somebody else's expectations just to make the other person feel safe? And I saw an excellent video this week talking about, and it was by an American comedian who ended up relocating to Germany for personal reasons. She married a husband and gone over to Germany. And she put out this video talking about her experiences in Germany, going into saunas, and she hasn't had gender confirmation surgery, or hadn't as of the time of the video. And gender critics basically went to town on her video talking about what she'd said. And I was like, she was absolutely spot on. Her point was this: why should my life be dictated by somebody else's fears? Because ultimately, the EHRC guidance and the 4 Women in Scotland ruling bake in this idea that if somebody is afraid of somebody else's identity, that they have the right to exclude that person. And it could be a trans woman, it could be a Jewess, it could be a Muslim woman, it could be any identity, that if that person is perceived as a threat, they can be excluded. And that's my biggest problem with the HRC guidance, because ultimately it sets up that personal fear is enough to exclude. And I don't think that's proportionate, and I definitely don't think that's a legitimate reason for it to exclude trans women from spaces. And yes, so have you got anything you would like to close out with?
No, I think I've pretty much rambled on enough. But it's been great. I love talking to you. You sort of bring out thoughts from me that I perhaps need to have. So thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I think it's a very timely conversation. If anyone's got any questions or wants to raise any comments, please feel free to put them down below. We are very happy to have this conversation with you. As always, these hot takes are very much our personal opinions. They are designed to be thought-provoking, and for gender critics who are there, I'm happy to have a good faith conversation with you, but bear in mind that this is a trans inclusive and pluralistic space. I will not put up with any abusive behavior towards Freda or anybody else in relation to the show. I have had to delete comments from previous videos because people have been attacking previous guests. So if you want to have a good faith conversation, I'm more than happy to have it with you. Otherwise, yes, your comment may well get deleted. But with all of that said, thank you for listening. I hope you have a fantastic week. And once again, Freda, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.